We just do maybe 10 minutes to finish our conversation that became so agitated and interesting when Instagram told us to stop. So, yes.
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about the possibility of critiquing technology, and then Instagram goes, "Ah,
Yeah.
done."
Yeah, and actually I was thinking who decided that you can have no more than 1 hour? They kind of think that everything could be discussed within 1 hour limit.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or
Is it a monetization thing? Like, if you pay more money, do these companies ask more?
no, you can actually do as many as you like. They just kind of decided to cut them into 1 hour pieces.
Huh.
Uh,
Well,
uh,
okay.
well, so we stopped in you saying that basically you can either try to adapt your music to this new way of thinking, or you can decide to ignore it, yes, and to do
Yeah.
your own thing. Yeah?
Yeah. I was just saying I kind of go back and forth with how like head on I specifically want to deal with this particular topic, which is the fundamental way in which technology has kind of changed our psychology. Um, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the piece that I'm writing right now is like, I think very much a reflection of the fact that I have decided during this quarantine period to like not read the news obsessively like I normally do, and to spend a little bit less time on social media, um, and to just to just kind of like simplify everything about my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the music that I'm writing is just a kind of like organic reflection of this particular moment that we're in, and that I'm in.
Uh, well, that's good that you brought it up because I wanted to inquire about your composing routine. In a way,
Yeah.
it seems that being a composer, it's being cleverer than all of us in terms of finding a way to focus while everyone else is losing the ability to focus. So,
Mm.
what are your techniques of long time focusing on composition?
It's very, very simple to the point that it sounds banal. But the earlier I start,
Mm-hmm.
the more focused I can be. So yeah, the best days are usually when I wake up, make coffee, maybe read a little bit, and then go right to the studio. And
Mm-hmm.
decidedly, like, not like I won't check my email, I won't read the news, I won't let any kind of noise get in the way. Um, and if I'm able to successfully achieve an hour of composing before like checking New York Times or whatever, then I'm able to somehow like maintain a certain focus and clarity throughout a much longer period of time, like 6 or 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's really just, yeah, it's a very simple technique, which is like start as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but of course, this might not work for other people. Like I have many friends and colleagues who are night owls and who like to compose in the middle of the night. But I'm a morning composer. I like to get up really early.
Can I ask a dummy question? If I imagine a writer, I can
Um,
imagine what he's doing, but I can't imagine what you are actually doing when you say, I'm composing. What are you doing?
I don't even know what I'm doing. I mean, it's like a weird, mysterious combination of improvising and listening and recording and sitting and thinking. Um, I mean, to be very specific about my methodology right now, I have been using my computer much more. I was a kind of purist like 10 years ago where I was like, oh, using your computers, that's a total crutch and you're not a real composer unless you're just sitting and thinking about everything in your head. Um, but yeah, I've been spending a lot of time recording uh, like improvisations on the piano, also making field recordings out in the city and out in, you know, the middle of the desert or whatever, and spending quite a lot of time transcribing improvisations and transcribing also field recordings and like ambient sounds that I would capture somehow. So there's a lot of that, a lot of very, very careful listening. But also
can I ask, ambient sounds is just the sound of the bird or of the wind, things like this?
Yeah, exactly. I was just I drove up to the far eastern part of California a couple weeks ago to make field recordings specifically for the ballet that we discussed, and I got a lot of sounds of like the river and some birds and some cars passing, and I was doing like timbral transcriptions, so not necessarily like the rhythms of the birds, but like the way in which like the sound of a river might like occupy a certain kind of frequency bandwidth to somehow then like weave into the piece in a way that doesn't directly involve the field recording. So just like a ton of listening, honestly, is like a big part of my practice. But what I was also going to say is that there's an element of the way I work which is very, very old-fashioned, which is that I will sit at the piano and I will play notes and like just struggle until I get it right. You know, like I've been working on a melody for the last 3 weeks, and it's 20 notes long, and it took me 3 weeks to get it right. So there is something kind of like super, super old fashioned. Like I feel like I'm like I don't know, like a blacksmith, just like, you know, working in a very kind of like just like really banal, basic way. But sometimes that's what it takes to get material.
But which part of you is the one who makes the judgment? How do you know that it's not the right note? Who is this?
That is the big and mysterious question. It's a matter of instinct and intuition and how you viscerally feel when you hear the music. But I think it also depends on like what kind of emotional investment you make into certain decisions throughout the course of the process. Like, for example, like what I arrived at, if that was the first thing that I had thought of when starting this new piece, it probably wouldn't have stuck. But now there's like this complicated, like I've been dating this melody for like 3 weeks, and now we have a relationship of sorts. and yeah, so there's like economists talk about the endowment effect, you know, that like you ascribe more meaning or more importance to things that you have actually spent money on, which is interesting when it comes to music now, because, you know, like when I was a teenager, I would go to the record store and I would buy a Miles Davis CD. Whereas now on Spotify, you're not actually buying the music, you're buying access to the music. And so I think we have like a very different emotional relationship with the music for that reason. And I think it's exactly the same with like material that you make in your studio. It's like if you've somehow invested a certain amount of time, like the material just means something completely different. But it's also very hard because if you've spent 3 weeks working on a very, very small fragment of music, it's also very difficult to like let it go. That's the hardest thing about composing, is being like, I did all this work, but that thing that I made needs to go.
Can I ask also about, like, now we've talked about geography. There is a piece of yours which has Drift and Providence, that has names of the streets in San Francisco. So my question would be how the geography of where you have grown up, like the whole Bay Area, can be said as influential in your works.
Right. It's a fantastic question, and rather than answering it myself, I'll provide you with an answer that a great Western author, Wallace Stegner, said, which is that you know, the art of the western part of the United States, you know, west of the 100th meridian or the Mississippi River, ultimately is an art about movement. And his kind of theory was that because west of the Mississippi, the United States is fundamentally defined by the fact that there's no rain, that it's an arid space, that like people in the West are used to a more like mobile lifestyle. And so when you read like the literature of like the West, like Willa Cather, of course, Wallace Stegner, but also like Kerouac to a certain degree, there's like a lot of movement built into that kind of tradition. And I think that you might even say the same thing about a lot of like West Coast minimalism, that there's like a sense of like moving places, like physical movement, not like emotional movement or intellectual movement, but like the actual sensation of like going somewhere. And so that would be my answer, which is a stolen answer from someone else. But I think specifically with that piece, I was thinking about the different movement titles, not specifically with respect to parts of San Francisco, so Embarcadero and Divisadero, but more in terms of the way that they describe certain formal aspects, like Embarcadero being a point of departure, and then Divisadero being something that splits a form in half. So Divisadero is literally like if Francisco is a square, Divisadero goes like right down the middle. And so even though there is a kind of like terroir, like, you know, local aspect to the naming of that movement, also really describes like what's happening in the piece, which is that there is a line that draws down the middle, and then the second half of the piece is a kind of like reflection of the first half in a sense. So.
Can I finish by asking how much are you influenced by your father as a figure? Is he listening to everything you write? Are you oppositional, or are you friends? As like, could you just maybe mention
all of the above? Yeah, we have a close relationship. We listen to everything we write. We're oppositional and we're friends. And yeah, I mean, I owe a hell of a lot to him. He's taught me so much about music, and I think that like now that I'm a little more mature, like it's a lot easier for me to recognize certain influences, and for beyond just recognizing them, but like incorporating them into some of my pieces. You know, when you're like in your 20s, or at least when I was in my 20s, my stance as a composer was one in which I was defining what I was not. You know, so it was like, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, not that, I'm not that. And at the kind of logical conclusion of that type of thinking is that you're not really anything, and there's not going to be a whole lot of like like fruitful conversation or discussion to be had when like you've pushed everything and everyone out. It's much more interesting to say like, okay, well, what am I? Am I that? Am I that? Am I that? And you know, of course, a huge part of who I am. I mean, half of my genetic makeup is him. So it's been yeah, it's been interesting, like asking the ways in which his music like has changed me and has impacted me and continues to impact me. Yeah.
Well, it's a good final point, like the start your childhood and to finish with your developing a connection with your father, whom I was glad and honored to meet this summer. By the way, I have an interview with him too. We sat and talked,
Right.
and he actually was interested in the post-Soviet period in Russia, which I was surprised that he was interested in. You know. Well, it's a good way to finish, not to keep you longer.
Yeah.
I think it was an incredible conversation. It made my evening today. There are so many things to think about, and this interview, both parts, would be saved on my site, so hope people would be able to watch it in future.
Good.
And
Yeah.
if you maybe a piece of self promotion, if you have some other colleagues who would like to have an anthropological, meaningful discussion, please let me know. I would be glad to talk to them. Yeah.
Sounds good, Yulia.
That's,
Thanks. It was
yeah.
lovely to chat with you.
Yeah, and stay safe and healthy, and hope once in a lifetime and or more than once you will be able to come to St. Petersburg, see our palaces and parks and
I would love it.
and the Mariinsky Theater.
Yeah, I
Bye.
look forward.
Mm-hmm.
Take care, Yulia. It was lovely to chat.
Mm-hmm. Bye.